Hello everyone. Now, before you sit down to watch today's episode of Bedhead Books, I'd just like to give a little disclaimer. There'll be a time code on screen if this kind of thing doesn't bother you and you would like to skip ahead to the review, but I'd just like to clarify something. So in this following review, I refer to the author of this book as Phil Savage, and I use the pronoun he. However, after I filmed my video and was doing research for my edit, I discovered that Savage had undergone a transition in 2019 and now identifies as Jane Savage. There are a couple of occasions in the book where Savage had acknowledged being gender fluid, but I don't mention these in my review because, quite frankly, male or female, Savage was still one of the most important figures in 90s music. Another thing I would like you to bear in mind as you watch this review is that Lunch with the Wild Frontiers was published under the name of Phil Savage. So Savage's transition was not complete at the time of this book's publication. In the future, I will endeavour to research the authors of the books further. Hello and welcome to Bedhead Books. Now you might have noticed I'm in a different set today. I'm actually back at my old house. I'm looking after my mum for a little bit, and all future reviews will be here for the foreseeable future. So we're going to crack on. Today we are going to be talking about Lunch with the Wild Frontiers by Phil Savage. As you can see here from the cover art, there's a very nice collage of Polaroids depicting the biggest names and faces of the Britpop era. So you've got Jarvis Cocker, Richard Ashcroft, Damon Albarn, Liam Gallagher, a real who's who of that scene. So Phil Savage started off in the late 1980s as a PR man, and as the title of the book might suggest, his first ever assignment was to have lunch with the Wild Frontiers, who were an offshoot from Adam and the Ants, formed by the Ants guitarist. Probably explains why we haven't really heard of them. They did peter out shortly afterwards. More interesting, though, were his other assignments around that time. So he was successful in securing an interview with Peter Gabriel and Rosanna Arquette. This would have been around the time that Gabriel was making the entrance into the realm of world music, and so this also put Savage in contact with Youssou N'Dour and instilled in him a love of world music. Now his biggest assignment at this point followed shortly afterwards, which was to work for Roy Orbison, who was in the UK promoting his new album Mystery Girl, and he wanted to have some interviews arranged at his hotel, and so his wife and manager got in touch with Savage. Savage met Orbison himself, and he had that thought run through his head that I think we all would when we get a bit starstruck and we meet someone. We think of the famous people that they themselves have met. And he met Orbison and thought, I am shaking the hand that has shaken the hand of Elvis Presley. And incidentally, if you didn't know, Orbison was actually one of Elvis's favourite singers. So that definitely would have contributed to his legendary status. The fact that apart from just being a friend, Elvis was a massive fan. So Savage arranged for Orbison to be interviewed by Nick Kent, who had been a legend in the world of music journalism since like the early 70s. But what Kent had always done for every single interview is to jot down notes. He'd never used a tape recorder. Allegedly, he jotted down these notes on the back of a cigarette packet. But because he too loved Roy so much, he got a tape recorder for the first time and actually unwrapped it and put the batteries in the hotel room right in front of Orbison and used it for the first time. And I can only imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been. The interviews, however, were very successful, and Orbison came down from his hotel room and said to Savage, look, I really like Ken, I really get on with him. Do you think he'd be interested in writing my biography? Unfortunately, this didn't come to pass as Orbison passed away shortly afterwards. Savage actually recalls being in a meeting a couple of weeks afterwards where the record company were talking about bringing forward the release date of Orbison's Mystery Girl album to take advantage of the fact that he was all over the news because he died, and Savage had to excuse himself because he was understandably rather disgusted by that. And I guess that's a witnessing firsthand of the ruthlessness of the music industry. It's rather like the Hunter S. Thompson quote that people appropriate to talk about the music industry, where they say, "The business is a cruel and shallow money trench. It is a long plastic hallway where pimps and thieves run free and good men die like dogs." There's also a negative side. So the bulk of the book is taken up by an agency that Savage formed with a guy called John Best, who were active in the 90s and represented a number of big names in Britpop, most notably Suede, who were very underrated in the Britpop era. But they also represented Blur, Pulp, Elastica, lesser known bands such as Ultrasound. Amongst the acts that they represented, there was a pop art collective called Fat Les, who comprised Keith Allen, who was an actor, comedian, all-round annoyance, and father of Lily Allen, Damien Hirst, innovative artist, and Alex James, the bass player from Blur. And they'd written a song for the 1998 World Cup called Vindaloo, and Savage was behind giving that the big sort of promotional push. And there were a few more singles, but none of them quite as successful as Vindaloo. There was another attempt at a World Cup anthem, for example. This does mean there's a chapter in the book where Savage talks about football, which is where he kind of loses me a bit, with me not being a football fan. But another one of his very interesting assignments was around the late 90s. He was working with Andrew Lloyd Webber, who was himself working with an Indian composer called A.R. Rahman. I hope I'm saying his name right. Rahman would be known to us now as the composer of the Slumdog Millionaire soundtrack, which does include a piece called Jai Ho, which the Pussycat Dolls later appropriated for one of their songs. Now, Savage was able to identify that Rahman was such a big name in India, sort of on the level of Lennon and McCartney, but unlike Lennon and McCartney, who do still divide a lot of people's opinions, everybody in India loved Rahman, and Savage realised that if he could bring Rahman out of his shell to do more public appearances, that would be a great way of publicising the work that Rahman was now doing in the UK. And he did that very successfully, and they packed out all the local record shops, and Rahman turned up to sign records and autographs. And that was really one of Savage's last major assignments for the Savage and Best agency, who did close up shortly afterwards. And of course the declining Britpop was obviously a factor in that. If you like your music memoirs, particularly of the people behind the scenes who keep the artists in the public eye, then Lunch with the Wild Frontiers is definitely a book for you. The other book I would equate it to is the memoir of Derek Taylor, who was the Beatles' PR man and a pivotal figure in Apple Records. This is kind of like the Britpop version of that. But Lunch with the Wild Frontiers is a very solid book, and I am going to give it a 7 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, don't judge this book by its cover. One love.